Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. My name's Kemal Onor, and on today's episode, I'm going to be talking all about how to find your writing voice. So let's head into the storm. Okay, writes. A lot of authors will be very concerned about are they imitating other writers, and again, going back to the idea of thinking about my ideas, are my ideas good enough? What's going to separate you from other authors, what's going to separate you from anyone else writing is going to be your own voice. It's going to be your own unique way of telling a story, and this can manifest itself in many different ways. It can manifest itself in the sort of language that you use. It can manifest itself via or through. It can present itself through your use of similes or metaphors, and there's so many different ways that your voice will come out. But how do we discover our voice? How do we figure out what our true voice is? Because when people just start writing, we tend to imitate our favorite authors. We tend to emulate the books that we've read. We tend to in a way copy the styles and copy the voices of the authors that we've read, of the writers that we've admired. We tend to copy those voices because those are the voices that we're hearing in our heads when we start writing. We might be inspired to write because we read a book by a certain author, or we read a certain series by a specific author, and we read everything that he or she wrote, and that's going to be the voice that we hear in our head. And it's sort of by default, you're going to be emulating, you're going to be trying to replicate these voices that you've read and these voices that you admire. So one of the big things that you have to do to discover and separate yourself from the authors that you've been reading, because reading is so important. You have to read in order to be a great writer. In order to be a writer, you have to read. In order to separate and start to develop your own voice, and developing your own voice is not something that happens overnight. It doesn't happen after writing just a couple stories. Developing your voice occurs over several years of practice, several years of writing. I remember when I was going through undergrad, I was constantly writing stories that were archaic. I was writing stories that reflected the sort of Victorian era authors that I was reading in my literature classes, and these voices were very archaic. They were not modern day voices. These are not contemporary authors by any stretch of the imagination. And so the stories that I was presenting for workshops and for writing classes was very much these ancient. I was using words that had no place in modern writing, and my voice, I hadn't yet developed my voice. I was trying to emulate the authors that I was studying and emulate the authors that I was reading. And so through the course of writing, and through the course of just writing story after story, of just creating bad writing, because that's one of the big things that you have to do to begin to develop your voices. You have to be okay writing bad writing. You have to just write as much as you possibly can, and the more bad writing that you do, the better and better your work will get. Over time, you'll gradually start to see a pattern within your own work. You'll start to see similarities between your work. Maybe you have a certain way that you like to describe characters. Maybe you constantly refer to characters in a specific way, and this might be your style of representing characters. I know that in much of my fiction, I tend to not describe my characters. I tend to often leave my characters as ambiguous. I'll typically refer to him or her using their name, or I'll refer to the protagonist character using I, but I seldom do I give a physical description of my character. And this is a stylistic choice that is part of my unique way of storytelling, which is part of my voice. And so the stronger that your own unique voice can become, the better chance you have of being accepted, because you don't want to be submitting the same type of stories that everyone else is writing. You want to be writing stories that have a strong, unique voice, and that a lot of publishers are looking for authors who have strong, unique voices and who know what their voice is, And I used to try and edit my voice out of what I was originally writing. I used to try and think about ways that I would be editing my work, and I'd say, no, I need to say it in this specific way because it's how this other author that I've admired would say it. And so thinking about, there's a way of editing to make sure to keep your voice intact. And this is one of the biggest jobs of an editor for a magazine. This is one of the biggest jobs for an editor for a book publication, is how do you edit and keep your unique voice intact? How do you keep that voice as the thread that is being woven through the novel? How do you maintain that voice without diluting it, without presenting it as someone else's voice? Because the number one thing that is going to separate you as an author is going to be your voice. It's going to be the reason that readers will come to read your work specifically, is the fact that you have your own unique voice, and every author has a unique voice. Every author has a different way of writing within the confines of grammar, because again, you have to understand the rules of grammar. And I will be eventually doing a series all looking at grammar. I'll be doing a series analyzing different types of writing advice and what we can take away from them. So be on the lookout for that soon. But you have to understand that the best way to develop your unique voice is to emulate, is to write a lot of bad writing. It's to just write, and through the act of writing, your work will gradually get better and better and better until your unique voice will burst out from within the pile of rubbish writing that you're creating. And again, there's nothing wrong with writing bad. I think every author has to write bad before they can start to develop their voice, before they're able to start to understand what makes them unique and what sets them apart from other authors, even within a genre or within their writing career as a whole. So understand that this does not occur overnight. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes many, many stories. You have to just write as much bad writing as you possibly can. You just need to write and just keep writing. There's so many times when you can give up, so many different times when you can say, I'm not good at this. And a better way to rephrase that is, I'm not good at this yet. Think about, it's a journey. Every word that you write is another word closer to your own voice being discovered, to your own voice emerging from within the writing that you're doing. And there's nothing wrong with emulating. Again, I truly believe every author, every writer begins his or her own journey with emulating, with trying to copy the style and copy the language of writers that you admire, writers that you look up to and inspire you to write, because these are the authors, these are the books that you are reading, and these are the voices that you're going to have in your head. But again, the more writing that you do, and your early writing is not going to be the best writing that you'll ever produce. You need to understand that every time the more writing that you do, the better and better you'll get at it. That's why the two best things that you can do to improve your writing is to read a lot and write a lot. And there's really no way around those two things. And so you just have to understand that in the early stages of your writing, it's going to be a lot of bad writing. And until you start to develop your voice, which is a very natural process, I believe it to be a process of just writing as much bad writing as you possibly can and sticking with it, because so many people can easily become discouraged in those early days of emulating, of trying to copy another author's style before your voice emerges. A lot of people will say, this isn't good writing, and you might feel shy, you might feel put off from the act of continuing to write, but you have to keep writing. I remember almost every single night in my undergrad degree, I would stay up till about 1 to 3 in the morning writing. And just for the sake of writing, this wasn't work that I was writing for a course. This wasn't writing that I planned on showing anyone. This was simply writing for me. This was writing that I wanted to write. And you have to kind of have that idea of like, there needs to be some writing that early on is just writing for the sake of writing. This writing that you're doing early on is writing that is never going to see the light of day. This is writing that is just you on a journey trying to discover your own voice. And so as you continue to write, your voice will become stronger and stronger. And ideally, you want to try and separate yourself from the authors that you admire. You want to try and to do something uniquely different. Now, I'm not suggesting that you try and change the wheel, because again, grammar is grammar, and there are sort of expectations for certain genres that you need to understand. You need to understand what certain tropes are of a genre, say such as horror, or what are the certain tropes of a genre such as romance, and think about what can you bring that is new and fresh. Understand that human beings, we all have our own unique views. We all have our own unique experiences. A lot of the things that we go through are pretty mundane. We have a lot of shared experiences, but I guarantee you, if you look at your own life, there are things that will stand out, that separate you from everyone else. There'll be things that you've experienced that others haven't experienced. I certainly know that I know that I certainly experienced a life-changing event at the age of 13, when a lot of people have never had to deal with having a stroke. A lot of people have never had to deal with recovering from a stroke. A lot of people have never had to deal with that social isolation of coming back to a school setting after having a stroke, and seeing the change in the way that people view you, seeing the change in the way that people viewed me. And this is a unique perspective that I can bring to my own writing, because it allows me to understand isolation, allows me to understand how an individual would feel going through that experience. And that allows me to write stronger pieces about being socially ostracized. I can certainly write a lot of stories that take place in hospitals, because I spent a very long amount of time in a hospital. So I can certainly attest to what that experience was like, living out of a hospital bed, and what it was like going through that recovery. And these are all things and experiences that I can bring to my fiction, and it's part of my voice. It's all part of discovering your voice. Again, the number one thing you can do to discover your voice is to just write as much bad writing as you possibly can, and eventually it'll get better. You just have to stick with it. Understand that it's a process. The more reading that you do, it's going to help you. It's going to help understand. The more reading that you do, it's not going to destroy your voice if you're reading a whole lot. But I highly recommend that you read widely, and don't necessarily read in one genre. You want to be reading. You want to be reading within your genre. You also want to be reading outside of your genre, because the more voices that you have going on, the more that you can sort of pick from and borrow, especially in those early days of your writing. But as you start to develop in your voice, and as you start to strengthen your voice, and your voice becomes stronger and stronger, you want to be mindful that you're not editing out your voice. You want to try and keep your voice as unique as possible. Now, this doesn't mean using sort of flares or using grammar incorrectly. This means that you are telling a story in a way that feels natural to you, because your voice needs to be a natural way of you talking. It needs to be a natural way of you writing, because not everyone's going to write the same way. If you're telling a story, you might hyperfixate on the details of what your protagonist looks like or what your antagonist looks like. You might hyperfixate on what your characters look like down to the last minute detail. On the other hand, I choose to leave my characters as ambiguous and leave that more up to the reader. I tend to mention my character sort of in passing, but I never give finite details of what he or she looks like. And that's part of my style. That's part of my voice. And if you want an example of strong voice within a story, I highly recommend that you check out some of my publications. Those are linked in the description down below. You can go to my personal website. You can hit the publication tab, and it has all of my publications listed there. So that's going to be the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know, do you have a strong voice, or are you continuing to try and discover and hunt for that voice of yours? Thank you so much for watching. And as always, keep it spooky. And then, of course, here's your bonus for sticking all the way to the end of the video. They entered the tomb. There was a smell of moldy bones and spiders crawling on the walls. They turned to each other and said, blank. So set your timer and start writing. Thank you so much.